This program is brought to you by Globus.
The Rhetoric EU cuts direct Russian energy science trade deal with India. Are these signs of deglobalization or a new stance of globalization? New alliance like the India-EU free trade deal is supposed to strengthen new world dynamics, but it's rather bringing the world into a complex scenario, and we look at the importance of this scope given India's proximity with the Russian energy. Today's topic zooms on the economic, security, political, legal, rhetorics, and social rhetorics surrounding the EU's stance on Russian energy and its rapprochement with a non-aligned nation like India. On paper, according to reports, Europe looks bold and united, phasing out Russian gas and oil, adopting new bans and penalties, and telling the world it is no longer financing Moscow's war. At the very same time, Brussels celebrates a historic trade agreement with India, opening markets for goods, services, and strategic sectors, including technology, green transition, and critical supply chains, framing New Delhi as a key like-minded partner in its economic and geopolitical reorientation. However, besides the discourse is a blurred picture of a complex scenario. To what extent would the 2027 deadline be met? What are the ramifications, especially on major nations within the European Union? The ambiguity, sacrificing Europe for Ukraine. India buys, according to reports, cheap Russian crude, refines it, and can sell fuel into global markets, including back towards European or Europe through commercial channels, while deepening its own gains from both Moscow and Brussels. Small European countries, however, face massive legal and financial burdens as they scramble for alternative supplies at higher prices under new rules and timelines. And the big question remains, can the whole of Europe or the EU truly survive without Russian energy? And if so, who will pay the real cost? Our guest does they will unpack, of course, looking at the consequences on ordinary Europeans, what this rhetoric is all about, looking at the EU-India deal, and of course, asking the question if this will really change how it might affect India's energy relationship with the Russian Federation, with the United States of America, with China and other partners, and also how this strategy can expose new fractures inside Europe itself. And we can end this segment of this conclusion, probably the introduction by asking if this is just about energy. Is it just about power, credibility, and a gap between rhetoric and reality? This and more we're going to uncover in the course of today's edition of Global Insight. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. We are in a world of new alliances, economic alliances, strategic and diplomatic alliances, among others. Welcome as we look on today's edition of the program, which zooms on the historic trade or free trade deal between the European Union and India. And at the same time, we want to question the fact that the EU is bent on phasing out reliance on Russian energy. But the key question lies where the rhetoric is, and that is what we seek to understand in the course of this discussion with a panel of experts this day, ladies and gentlemen, understanding the new dynamics of the global world and, of course, the changes happening around Europe between the European Union and the United States of America, and how this recent trade deal with India will affect both its strategic cooperation or partnership with other countries, particularly the Russian Federation, knowing that, as we underlined already in the preamble, that India actually relies heavily on Russian energy. Is this new trade deal going to probably have a negative impact on the Russia-India partnership, given the fact that the EU is bent on seeing that they do not actually probably purchase Russian energy, be it directly or indirectly? What are the implications of such an action as we continue to navigate this era? Without much ado, let's dive straight away to the uncovering the panel. But we're going to kick off with Arnold Dovely, who is an international lawyer and who doubles as a political consultant who's been keener on the development in Europe regarding their stance, especially towards Russia and other global partners. It's a pleasure having you this day, dear Arnold, and I will welcome you directly with this question: the legal implications of the recent acclaimed trade deal between the European Union and India, a discussion that has been ongoing for 20 years, and of course, the world celebrated this milestone with the signing of this free trade deal. So what do you have holistically to say regarding this?
Yes, thank you, Clarice, for having me again on this most interesting topic. Well, I would just say as a preamble that if we talk strictly speaking about the legal aspect, essentially we have to look how Europe itself is betraying its core values. Remember that Europe was built initially as a political economic compact aimed at promoting Europe's economic interest.
Mm-hmm.
And what we're seeing through this, the conclusion of this mega free trade agreement with India is anything but. It does exactly the opposite. And it comes on the heels of the forced, contrived signature over the heads of the European people of this free trade agreement between Brussels and South America. So essentially, Europe is finding itself between a rock and a hard place, where it's going to delegate essentially to countries that are not burdened by environmental or social restrictions in as far as their production are concerned.
Mm-hmm.
Their ability to themselves become a independent, prosperous, self-contained, self-relying industrial power. So obviously this is something that tends to favor European corporation, maybe transnational corporation, in the sense that some of those companies may have their headquarters anywhere but in Europe. But the regular people in Europe, by and large, are going to lose major on those two deals combined. Let's call it a coup de grace.
Of course, thank you for that introductory statement. We go now to South Africa to meet Paseka Faromale, who is a UNISA academic and, of course, a member for the Panafricanism and for Pan-Africanism and Progress. It's a pleasure having you once more on this platform, dear Pasika. And we are actually looking at the rhetorics. Sometimes we listen to the discourse coming from officials, politicians, and policymakers, like what we listen from Ursula von der Leyen and the Indian official after inking this deal that it actually pointed the mother of all deals. So let's have a holistic understanding of the deal and how it probably, will change the dynamics or affect the dynamics of Europe and probably India's relationship with the Russian Federation and China.
Thank you, Clarice. One thing that we've come to learn is that the priority for these countries, specifically the EU, is not necessarily theoretical or rhetoric, but it is financial. It is fundamentally about what makes economic sense to them. So I look back to what happened back when the Russia-Ukraine war started. What happened was sanctions were imposed on Russia. However, Europe still extensively bought its gas from Russia. And if that is the case, it means that you do not necessarily have the guts and the actual audacity to cut ties with the country that you have decided to sanction. And it is logical because their priority is not necessarily making sure that their rapport with Russia is okay, but their priority is to make sure that their own socioeconomic realities are in the right place. So that means that what is currently happening, specifically with Europe trying to continuously buy its oil and gas from Russia, from India, it means that it's a continuation. The only difference is that now we have a middleman. So if that is going to be the case, we are in for an interesting time because the UAE has been trying to impose more and more tariffs on India so that it can cut ties with Russia. But I do not see that happening, primarily because India has nothing to lose. Because if it cuts ties with Russia, then it is bound to lose millions and billions and trillions of dollars. So it is illogical for them to cut ties with Russia, especially for a country that has been hostile to the rest of the world. I mean, it has also been hostile to Europe itself, who for a very long time have been their friends and neighbors. So it doesn't make sense to move the opposite direction of where the rest of the world is moving, as we can clearly see that the rest of the world is fundamentally moving towards the east. We see that Canada has strengthened its ties and trades with China. We see a lot of European countries, England and the likes, going into China to build better rapports because their allies have decided to go against everyone else and isolate while they're still trying to impose themselves to the rest of the world. So it is quite an interesting time. And I think that there's no more morality, nor is it logical for us to try and still push rhetoric, because on a human surface, rhetoric and ideology have been found wanting. We have been told that there is international law that has to be followed. We have been told that it is not okay to take over someone else's property. We have been told that you cannot touch another country's president, especially without the consent of the rest of the UN or at the very least of NATO. And now, since all of that has been thrown out the window, specifically by the United States, we find ourselves in a very peculiar position where I think that international rhetoric and international solidarity is something that is fundamentally out of the window at this point in time. I hope I did speak to your question, Clarice. Thank you.
To come back subsequently, Pasika, for more clarity on the topic. Coming back to you, Arnold. We want to look at this because in our preamble, we still highlighted asking if actually it's a trade deal or probably a moment of repositioning, because it is clearly stated that the EU is against Russia in favor of Ukraine, and that is why we've been seeing a series of sanctions that today we see the bloc wanting to probably work towards what they see, reducing of reliance on Russian energy or gas, as is already stated. So the question is, do you think this EU's decision to phase out Russia's gas by 2027 is authentic or probably genuine? It's a genuine strategic break at this particular moment, or probably it's bringing us again to the reality of the, the fragmentation of the international order, as we see the U.S. Recently hitting some EU countries with tariffs, and of course, given that. After major discourses in the Davos summit that just ended, a few weeks ago.
No, I think as your panelist said, that this is something to do more about political rhetoric. Obviously, the EU is still buying Russian gas via India, so they're buying more expensive gas and petrol from Russia that they would have otherwise done prior to the Ukraine situation and all this ridiculous self-inflicted sets of sanctions. And at the same time, they are basically setting the stage again, like I said, I mean, from the globalist approach, it's a way to somewhat draw a divide between China and India. By opening its markets to India, the idea is to lessen the reliance on Chinese products. So there is a strategic interest here. But is that really the EU strategic interest in doing so? When even Keir Starmer himself paid a visit to China a week ago as a kind of a departure from what rhetoric we've been hearing the last 15, 20 years, bearing on so-called genocide in Western China and the human rights violation, alleged human rights violation, as opposed to just talking about the reality of things. And so I think the EU is just, or the EU leadership, I should say, the European Commission, the illegitimate European Commission, is only doing the bidding of transnational globalist anti-Russia and anti-China interests. And to the extent that they want to basically reduce the opposition that is growing stronger every day within the EU member states in the wake of the mass immigration, which makes absolutely no economic sense. Some will tell you it's about addressing the demographic problem. But if you had, your priorities straight, you would set up a pro-nativity, pro-family, and pro-children policy. No need to go get people from outside. So the EU is essentially just selling its own people down the river. And we're going to be now getting 20 millions, I repeat, 20 millions Hindus into Europe. I mean, in France alone, we already have 150,000 Afghans. I don't know if you understand what Afghan culture is. We're not talking about the Maghreb culture here. We're talking about Afghanistan. This is like a medieval state. India is all about the caste system, which does not even recognize the right to life of 90% of its own population. So it's a deal between the EU bureaucrats and the Brahmin class of India, essentially, on the back, essentially, of its own untouchable class over there and our own impoverished, replaced population in the West. Nothing more, nothing less. The same people are going to line up their pockets, and the same people are going to be dealing with the consequences every single day of their lives.
Indeed, talking about the consequences, I stay with you, Arnold Devlin. We note that many countries in the EU, particularly Germany, actually was built after the Cold War, relying on cheaper gas from Russia. And in 2025, we saw the industrial sector, industry thought leaders in Germany actually calling on Germany to review its stance pertaining sanctions on Russia and the effect that the industry probably is already facing. And today, if we are going back to history, we note a period where people actually froze to death in Europe as a result of severe climatic conditions. Let's look at this human consequence that most at times it's been probably neglected as maybe diplomatic and strategic and even geopolitical stakes are usually put ahead while relegating the direct severe effect on humanity.
I'm sorry, I didn't catch your question in the middle. There was a lot of statics.
So we are looking at the consequences of these on the society, where we took an example where, as history tells us, was a period in Europe where the climatic conditions were so severe that people had to, succumb to death due to very freezing temperatures. And today we see industry thought leaders calling on probably Germany to review its stance pertaining the boycott of Russian gas as the effect is being felt by the common people. So we're looking at the consequences, the societal consequences, rather than the strategic, diplomatic, or even geopolitical stakes, which have always overshadowed decisions at the EU bloc.
Yeah, well, I mean, we don't need to talk about free trade agreements to basically point out the logical shortcomings of this so-called climatic situation here. You have to remember that even the United States was not even attending the COP31 as they might have done so 10 years ago. So this whole environmentalist climate change scam is essentially now only followed by Europe. So Europe has got all the trappings of a place where logic is completely inverted. It's playing against itself. It's acting against its own interest in opening its own market without protecting its own workers and its own industries. It doesn't favor even the creation of its own GAFAM, relying on the United States and then complaining when the United States apply the First Amendment on said platforms. So now they're realizing that they may need to actually have their own digital sovereignty, but it's a little bit too late, isn't it? And as far as you were mentioning Germany, well, Germany has been a U.S. colony since 1945. Mm-hmm. If the Germans were truly sovereign, you can be sure that they would have entered into a strategic relationship with Moscow. Everybody knows that the EU initially was started as a US-sponsored construct to allow US companies to have a market, a captive market for their own goods. But over time, with the re-emergence of China, the emergence of China and the re-emergence of Russia, some few decades following the Cold War, then Europe became essentially a sacrificing lamb for the elites in Washington. And so through the careful placing of quislings and collaborators within the EU commissions and within respective EU member political national structure, one feeding into the other, all those policies are being basically self-detrimental. They have been essentially towing the line of what Washington's strategic interests are all about. And this goes all the way down to this climatic nonsense, which again originated in the United States in those West Coast universities. And this led to basically the dismantlement of entire energy sector in Europe. I mean, France was number one for decades in nuclear technology. We used to sell nuclear reactor around the world. We owned the manufacturing chain. We owned the patent. And this was changed when people like Emmanuel Macron, a U.S. agent, an agent from the Rothschild global banker cabal, basically sold out the family jewels, i.e., the turbines, Arabelle turbines, for a portion of its real value, buying it back from General Electric 6 times its selling price, and finding itself in a situation now where it has to seek permission from GE whenever it sells its savoir-faire, nuclear savoir-faire, over the exportation of the Arabelle, which is ours. We made that. General de Gaulle left us the number 3 economy in the world in 1970, the number 3 technological country in the world in 1970. And this was all dilapidated in 50 years by a bunch of traders, all traders, beholden to foreign interest. And so what we're saying today is just the logical conclusion of a concerted, controlled demolition, which basically aims at taking Europe out of history, outside the realm of history. And I would say, doing away with its very people by replacing them with millions upon millions, tens of millions of migrants, what I call them illegals, who are not going to be, mobilizing against their slave masters because they are too happy to be getting, a modicum of a handout by whatever is left of the system. But this was anticipated decades ago, and this is not a surprise for those of us who have been following the process. It was always doomed or destined to end up this way.
And of course, it's good to probably bring this to the realities of this new world order. Coming back to you, Pasika, you talked earlier about Europe wanting to ensure its, energy or security sovereignty. And today we are still looking at the probably the rhetoric behind the reason, because according to pundits and clear evidences, it is clear that this move came as a result of Europe saying that them buying Russian oil will mean sponsoring or helping Russia in the war in quarter against Ukraine. But then, according to these trade agreements with India, a very major partner to the Russian Federation, the EU highlighted that they will ensure that they check the gas or energy products getting to the EU markets to ensure that the primary source is not from, the Russian Federation. We know that India is a non-aligned state actually between the West and the East. And we also know that in this strategic decision makings, like we want to take the decision of probably the position of the United States of America, Donald Trump has been on its philosophy of make America great again. But we see such a very, strategic decision being taken at the bloc just for Ukraine. We know that Hungary and other countries have actually taken legal, challenges regarding the position of the EU pertaining its dealing with Russia as far as gas or oil is concerned. So what appraisal can you give to this and try to bring maybe some analysis into what we need practically to reignite the spirit of globalization in the world of today?
Thank you, Clarice. I think the term globalization itself, it will be very difficult for me to rationalize and support the idea of globalization, considering where globalization in itself comes from, the idea of globalization. The Vice President of the United States came out a few months ago, and he said he was very frustrated with China and the Chinese, and he said that globalization has gone too far, because initially what they had hoped for was for countries of the West, specifically the United States, England, Germany, and France, and the likes, was for them to be able to benefit from the rest of the world, but not the rest of the world to benefit from them, from the global West. What that basically meant was that, what he basically said was that globalization in its essence was to make sure that all the hard work is done in these far off countries in the East and in the South. And as I said, specifically was referring to China. But what happened was that some countries were able to strategically position themselves to a point where they were able to do so much that they ended up competing with them. Today, the UK is not a global superpower anymore. France is not a global superpower anymore. Germany is not a global superpower anymore. Technically, the only superpowers in the world are the United States, China, and Russia. Those are the three main superpowers of the global world. Why is that? Because they were able to strengthen themselves economically, they were able to strengthen their military, and they were able to strengthen their relationships until the United States recently regressed from the rest of them. But these two countries were able to strengthen their relationships with other countries throughout the world, but specifically in the global South. So, in that being said, globalization, for us to strengthen it, I do not necessarily see the advantage and the strength of being able to strengthen a globalist world where you still have these key countries that still want to control narratives and ideas, that still want to push their own agendas to the rest of the world. If you do not agree with them, then they can push you to the side. We can look at what happened with Venezuela recently. We can see what was happening specifically last year around this time at the start of Trump's presidency with Canada, and that is why Canada finds itself in the position that it has taken economically in terms of moving towards the east more. So and with that being said, I think that it is essential for us to understand the idea of globalization has become very problematic in the last few years. It was sold as a great idea to connect people from all over the world, but countries of the world, specifically countries such as the United States, have not found that idea that they had to be practicalizing itself in a way that it satisfies what they initially needed when they pushed this idea. I mean, my fellow panelists did speak initially when he started about people going towards Europe from the global South. And that is one of the problems that have been due to globalization itself. And to be very specific, moving to the West is not a problem for me. I was reading up on South Americans moving to North America, specifically the United States. There is a reason for that, and there's a rationale that the global elite, specifically from the West, have initiated for that to happen. These countries perpetually go to other countries in the global South. They pillage, they steal, they kill people, and they corrupt their governments to a point where these countries become unsustainable. Once that happens, where do they think the people who remain behind are going to go? The United States problem of migration is specifically and fundamentally due to their own actions in them interrupting other countries and playing huge roles in those countries, disrupting how the country functions, disrupting the economy of the country for its own benefit. So what happens at the end of the day? People move from their countries to go find their wealth in the rest of the West. And specifically, we look at, again, what happens in France and why Europeans are so irritated with what happens in France, seeing so many Africans. The reason is because France has its hands inside the continent. France, until this day, as much as we've seen differences in the Sahel with countries fighting back, but France continues to benefit from what is happening in the continent of Africa. Where are these people supposed to go if you destabilize their country? So that is very important. We cannot discuss globalization without having to discuss what these countries that these people move to have done or continuously do, and continue to benefit those global elites at the very top who benefit from the suffering and the destabilization of these people on the ground. And going back to the rhetoric, right? Going back to the rhetoric, I think that it is essential for us to understand that the rhetoric that is currently happening between not just India and Europe, but the rest of the world. One of the things that Donald Trump did was that he imposed tariffs on India because India continuously played the role of a middleman. But with that being done, the United States continues to have its relationship with China and its relationship with Russia. But they do not want everyone else to continue to have these relationships. For me, what I'm seeing with this rhetoric is the rhetoric of the hypocrite. And that is why I was so emphatic when I was emphasizing the relationship between Europe and Russia, or the EU and Russia, because the EU has presented itself as as these moral people. But you look at them until today, they still continue to suppress and oppress those who are from the global south, or those who are of a darker color. You see who they support in the ongoing genocide in Palestine. They continue to support the Israelis. But what do they present themselves as? They present themselves as people of morality. And that is why I emphasize that this cannot be rhetoric of the smart. This is rhetoric of hypocrisy of the West. They are going to do what benefits them. And that is why them being able to strengthen their relationship with India, knowing very well where the Indian oil and gas is coming from, knowing very well it's coming from the very country that you try to sanction. So at the end of the day, the reason why Vladimir Putin does not even dismiss any of this that is happening is because he is going to get his due, because at the end of the day it is still going to come back to him the money that he needs for him to be able to fund his progress into Ukraine. And Ukraine is another story for another day, because they themselves are the biggest hypocrites in this discourse. But we will take it from there. Thank you, Caris.
Absolutely, taking it from there and understanding the ambiguity. Do you share the same viewpoint regarding the EU stance, Arnold Doubly, and its effect on the concept of globalization, which is in this century having a different and contextual meaning? Just to note that we are actually in a world of new alliances, and looking at I don't know if we could put it as re-alliances, and of course with new terms that suit the present status quo of the global world, particularly in line with international relations and cooperation.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say that globalization is not the problem in and of itself. Globalization is an ahistorical phenomenon, which started about 500 years ago. It just happened to enter a new phase at the end of the 1980s.
Mm-hmm.
The problem is that the neoliberal ideology, not capitalism per se, industrial capitalism within the concept of a nation state with some, state intervention to some level in as far as strategic sector is concerned, it's perfectly okay. And you can do globalization using those metrics. This is what the Russian Federation has been doing very successfully the last 25 years. And they are doing good, and they are, as much an actor of the globalized world as you can imagine. The problem is that global elites, quote, and I mean really quote unquote, in the West, basically, and as the co-panelist said, they basically sold out their own middle class. How can you have a country that works on its feet if you sacrifice your middle class? So they outsourced all those industrial capabilities, all the jobs that made them who they were, that made them the wealthy and the capital holders that they were, to try to basically inflict severe conditions on the Chinese people, as the co-panelist again said, to exploit them. And the reason why they're so mad today is bearing on the fact that the Chinese Communist Party actually played along, lured them into thinking that they would sell down the river their own people, but instead basically accumulated reserves and started rebuilding the country and lifting 800 million people out of sheer poverty. That's why we have all those tensions with China today, because China took care of its own people. China acted as a sovereign state and not just as one extension of a free market ideology gone out of control. And so I would say that, yes, this is probably par for the course. But, again, you don't want to assume that all the Europeans, although I do have a lot of qualms about what being a citizen seems to be all about these days in those countries when you don't even follow the most elementary, the most basic news, or at least you're all too willingly swallow what the state propaganda tells you.
Sure.
But in the end, it is the elites, and it's you have to look at it through a Marxism prism.
Mm-hmm.
It's just that this time it's not the class struggle is not that much at the level of a particular country anymore. It's at the level of the global, economy. And you have a bunch of cannibals. This is what President Putin called them. He's always identified them for who they were, no matter what the era, no matter what incarnation. They are a bunch of vampire balls who are willing to cannibalize themselves, literally sometimes, to preserve their modicum of control and power. And those people will go as far as they feel they are required to do so in order to stay on top. Make no mistake about it. So this is how we should basically view the situation. It's not an horizontal struggle; it's a vertical struggle. The problem is, how do you coordinate all the struggling working class, the laborious class, the one that makes it possible for economic miracles to happen in every country? How do you coordinate them in such a way that we can take down the global elites? That's what it's all about.
Absolutely.
This is the only thing that matters. We cannot be seeing it happening in one country or even one continent. There has to be, even by consensus, some kind of 3.5 points working arrangement, a manifesto, a new manifesto for the 21st century, which will marshal all the. We're billions. There are mere few thousands.
And I will stay with you, Arnold. Now, from what you've said, especially on the position of the global elite and their relevance, we can actually say again that this is a moment where these elites and other nations want to actually bring their relevance in the multi-polar world. And we want to answer this question from probably a geostrategic viewpoint as to, can we now say that the EU stands probably against the Russian Federation since, the start of the special military operation and its decision till date? Can we say that this is the way of trying to create their relevance in a multipolar world? And what are the ramifications of this on their economies as they continue to probably shun Russian energy and, with all the pressure, security pressure that they have at the moment?
Well, the net result, someone used to say that an economy is basically the means to do business at a cheap energy cost.
Sure.
The more the energy costs are high, the more the economic environment is not viable. So people are not going to work for free or run on empty just for the sake of some off the ground ideology. They want to basically be able to show something for themselves. So what we're going to be seeing more and more is European businesses, what's left of them, moving away. We see it already at the level of the German economy. I think upward to 40% of their homegrown companies are moving to the United States. So we can see through the cui bono question, who engineered this through, again, their relays in Europe, their agents. This is basically the way it's worked. It allows the American economy, which itself is in really bad shape structurally, to delay the inevitable and to basically buy time until this so-called AI sector takes off. I have my own doubt about it. This is not the issue today on our show, but you have to have an industrial base. You need to manufacture goods. You need to make stuff and sell them. This is how an economy works. You cannot make an economy out of financial alchemy or chemistry, some kind of scam. We see it again with this Bitcoin scam. It's still a scam. Why? Because we were told that a country doesn't need to be, working and manufacturing things, and menial work is irrelevant. All we have are parasites in Wall Street who basically are making money speculating and not creating anything. I thought Wall Street was supposed to be financing the sectors of tomorrow. It's anything but. So as long as those fundamentals remain in place, Europe to be sure, but eventually the United States as well, they will descend into economic industrial anomie, which will translate into sheer poverty and economic chaos, and the social cost will be enormous, especially if you take into account that more and more people are realizing they were sold down the river. And at the same time, and I'll echo what your co-panelist was saying, as far as the hypocritical discourse that's been accompanying all that.
Yeah.
And so people are starting traveling now for themselves outside of the Western confines, visiting Russia, visiting China, and realizing that, hey, those countries are advanced, they're modern, they're clean, they're safe, they are user-friendly for their people. You don't have all this filth in the street, all this sense of constant danger. And so a lot of people are now asking more and more the right questions. And payback is coming all the way in for the Western elites. Payback is coming. And no matter what the cost is, there's going to be blood, hell to pay. You can be sure of that. Because, those people have nothing to lose now. And they want blood. And we're going to get what's ours.
Absolutely. And of course, when the world is hailing the historic free trade agreements between the EU and India, questions continue to come to the table. And the aspect of the policy of non-alignment in global politics, diplomacy, and even in geostrategic standing becomes something of great importance. Pasika Faromali, what do you think of the future of the policy of non-alignment, and do you see this acclaimed trade deal as being, a stepping stone or probably a catalyst to position India in the sphere of international diplomacy and strategy?
Thank you, Clarice. I think before I speak to the non-alignment and where India will stand in its positioning, I think it is essential that I pick up on one of the points that our fellow panelists spoke to, or are not, on industrialization, right?
Sure.
And how it seems that industrialization has been delayed. One of the important questions, and I'm speaking from the point of view and perspective of an African, right?
Sure.
The reason why the rest of the world, specifically Europe, was able to industrialize so quick and do so well was because it was allowed to be able to do industrialization through the use of coal material, which today is looked at in a negative way because they say it influences climate change. And mind you, I'm by training, my PhD is in geography. And I do look at climate change to an extent, right, and migration and etc. But I also need to problematize this as a scholar and as an outside of being an academic, as a political analysis. I think that is something that is essential for us to problematize and definitely speak to. By that, I mean that Africa has not gotten to a point of industrialization the same way Europe was able to get into it. And when I say this, I mean the levels of productivity using the very same materials to generate electricity and power, specifically with Europe and its use of gas and coal, So if we were not afforded the same stages for us to be able to industrialize sufficiently, be able to develop our own goods in the continent through industrialization, then that means that we will never catch up to the rest of the world. And I think that is systematically enabled. There is something that, or some people specifically, that work to make sure that Africa is not able to industrialize itself, because you are only able to disable its effort through saying that Africa must be able to keep up with the rest of the world, but it can't use specific materials. In this specific case and point, you cannot use fossil fuels for you to generate your industrialization. If that is the case, then it means that the continent will never be able to catch up. And we have a very difficult situation if that is the case, because it means that whatever solutions Africa is able to develop would be solutions that have to be generated from specifically the West, and in this case, from Europe. And that, I think, that is a very key and a very important thing. The discussion on climate change and etc. I think it's a different discourse altogether that we can always have a discussion on. But I think that was something that is important that my fellow panelists spoke to. And I thought that from the context of Africa, it's something that we would need to discuss. It's a much bigger discourse and a discussion for us to be able to discuss, but it's not something that I think we have the time or space for us to be able to speak to. But I think it would make an interesting topic for us to discuss, specifically for Pan-Africanism and the goals of Africa moving forward. But going back to the question of alignment, right? Non-alignment, specifically in the case of India. It really frustrates me when countries say that they are non-aligned, because a lot of the time, countries are always aligned. They're aligned to countries that are able to benefit them.
Sure.
Even though they say that, but we do not have any alignment. I mean, specifically, I can tell you about the policy of South Africa, the country that I was born, I grew up in. South Africa says that it is non-aligned, but South Africa has clearly taken a decision that it is going to align itself with the East and these growing economies and those who fall under breaks.
Yeah.
But still, we position ourselves as a country that is not able to take a specific position in alignment. The United States is a failing and a falling empire. And that is why we are seeing the United States react in the way it is to everyone the world over. It is basically a dying lion in the jungle that is willing to try and protect itself at every given opportunity. And what makes it worse is this idea that we are now moving towards a multipolar world where you have different powers. And the frustration specifically with China is that China is now at a point where it does not have to use its military to show its strength, but China is able to build socio-economic relationships, specifically in Africa. I don't know how many documentaries you can read, you can listen to, how many articles you listen to that come specifically from the USA, speaking about China's initiatives in the continent of their road building initiatives in the continent of Africa. And all you see from this point of view is always the same thing. But why is China doing this? What is China looking to benefit? There's this thing that I find frustrating and that I'm coming to learn about how their logic works. You are only able to play a role in helping other people if you stand to benefit hugely. And they do not believe that China has an ability to play its role. So if a country like that, if a country like that, specifically the United States, is able to move the way that it is moving, it is able to position themselves the way that they are positioning themselves, who are we to still insist on a position of non-alignment? Specifically South Africa and India and the likes, because there are clear roles and responsibilities or positions that have been drawn in the recent years. There's something that I want to give an example of, but I just don't want to take a lot of your time. But there is something that I think it is very important and it is very key about this idea of non-alignment with specifically China and India. But can I please send the floor back to you, Clarice? Thank you.
Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen. Just to note that if you are just joining on, this is Global Insight on the Pan-African Media production of Globus. And today we want to look at the rhetorics behind or beside the discourse, the decisions made by leaders. What is that which is beyond the human comprehension, the one that serves just the purpose of the global elites who control the world? And of course, do they still have that capacity, given that the world is in the face of new alliances where we see more of fragmentation, according to some pundits, due to the resistance that is coming, and that fragmentation is seen on probably the stance of the European Union regarding global changes happening, and of course that touch its relationship with a strategic partner like the United States of America, a key contributor to a NATO alliance. And of course, we come now to understanding this fragmentation of the West. Some time ago, still on this platform, Arnold Doubly, we actually answered the question if Europe has been found wanting due to its, its position. And now the fact that this trade deal was signed with India, and we also see the probably some sort of squabble between EU and the United States, and of course within the EU itself, taking the example of Hungary and Slovakia on their decisions. So can we see this as a way of the continuous fragmentation of the bloc and how it's losing its voice? But then how can we navigate the polarization that is engulfing the global world in terms of relations within countries? Just been informed that we lost Arnold Doubly. You may want to answer the question Pasika formally. We are looking at the fragmentation of Europe and how this is affecting the overall global architecture.
Thank you, Clarice. This has been, you know why, as much as I problematize the President of the United States, but I appreciate him. I appreciate him because I think that in his own problematic way, he has been able to expose how hypocritical the West is. And by saying that, what I mean basically is that throughout history, the West has been reliable for the majority of the war that has happened throughout the world, especially in the global South. The West has been able to go into countries. They've been able to overthrow governments, but they would have some kind of rational excuse as to why they do it, or to say, no, we are doing this to protect the people, blah, blah, blah. But that's not what he has done. And I need to be very clear with this point that I'm making. What he has done is that he has done the exact same thing, but he has told the truth. And that is why he understands the power. And that is why people like Marco Rubio have come out and said, but we have the military strength. Who is going to do anything to us when we take the decisions that we are taking? Whether it's going into Venezuela, kidnapping their president, whether it's threatening Greenland and saying they're going to take it, which we suspect they might as well do it, whether it's them going to Canada and saying we'll make it our 52nd state or whatever, So all of that was not said, but it was done. But with this man in power, you see how hypocritical the West actually is, and specifically and particularly the United States of America. They said the rationale for them to going into Venezuela was for them to be able to get rid of a narco state, which we all knew didn't exist, but it was a rationale. It was a reason that you can put in law and say this is actually affecting the United States of America for 1, 2, and 3 reasons. They are a narco state and the president is a narco president. But the president of the United States of America came out and said, but we are going in there for the oil. We are going there because we need the oil. We want the oil. It is not because of the narcos. It's not because of the drugs. It's not because they are sending criminals into the United States. It has nothing to do with any of that. It's because we want the oil. So what I'm getting to with these few statements is to say the Europe still has the audacity to try and play the role of those who are more humble, those who are more modern, those who are more graceful, those who are, at the top of the world and can guide global politics and global discourse because they are rational. They have the rationale, and they are the ones who hold policy in their hands to say this is wrong, this is right. So what is happening now is that there's these conflicts that are happening, that we are seeing, that we are witnessing, because Europe is looking at the United States doing what they also do, doing what they support through NATO. But now the reasoning behind, the foundation behind the actions have not been brought forward, because the United States understand that where there is might, then it means that you can do as you please. And no one is going to stop you or do anything to you. So what have they decided? You are seeing now they've decided to have these frictions, even though they still try to act as if we are still on the same wavelength, us and America. But they know that is why they are saying even they themselves are working on strengthening their military power. Recently, the Chancellor, if I'm not mistaken, of Germany said that we need to make sure that Europe strengthens its weapons of mass destruction. We need to make sure that we collect them, we store them, because the world is not going the way that they had initially intended or how it has always gone. So with you understanding that you understand that Europe had outsourced its power to the United States, its military strength to the United States. Europe, for the most part, specifically NATO, they outsourced their power to the US because they looked at the US as this forever ally, this ally that we can always go to. And they stopped improving themselves. That's why when I was mentioning global superpowers, I mentioned 3 countries. I didn't mention European countries, because what these guys were doing is that they outsourced their strength, their military power and strength to the USA, and they themselves just continued functioning the way they wanted to function, and didn't strengthen their economies, their military, and etc. So now, with that being said, with that understanding, we come back to a very important point. Europe has no power, specifically the EU, has no power to actually fight the United States. But that also means that now the United States understands where it stands. The only country that they actually have any kind of fear towards is China. That's the only country. Russia would have been one of those countries, but Russia has been engaged in a long-term war. We call it special operation, but Russia has been engaged in a long-term war. And in a long-term war, it means that you cannot divest your resources to the war that you're facing. Understanding that in actual fact, Russia is not only fighting the Ukraine, but it's also fighting other European countries, because they consistently send people to go fight in Ukraine, and that is the only reason the war has been happening for so long. But still, they are fighting. They are losing actually this battle that they are currently having with the Ukraine. I'll come back to you, Clarice. Thank you.
Actually, thank you so much for that, Pasika. It's the platform just to emphasize, ladies and gentlemen, where we get to share ideas on issues of that concern the global world. And today on the table, we're looking at the ramifications of the EU going to phase out its total reliance on the Russian gas, and looking at the social, economic, political, geopolitical, and even legal ramifications of such. It is imperative that we answer this question with you, Pasika, before we round off. Do you think these sanctions on Russian energy, particularly from the EU, can push Russia to consolidate, I beg your pardon, some sort of parallel economic sphere with China, Iran, and others? Or is Russia already doing this? And how will this further, dismantle the ambiguous European Union bloc?
It's already doing it. It's already doing it. If you go into Russia and Moscow, the majority of cars that you start seeing on the road are either Russian made, slightly older, But the newer cars that you'll see are from China. These Chinese vehicles that we see flooding the market, and specifically in South Africa, your Cherries, your Haval, it's already in China. So they're already doing it, especially with India as well. They they are already strengthening their economies. One of the false narratives that Europe pushed, specifically the EU and America, was that Russia couldn't maintain and sustain this war. But they are becoming more and more frustrated, and that is why the USA had to sanction India, because Russia had planned for this war. I'm not sure if they had planned for it for as long a time as they have right now, but they planned for it for many years. They knew that this war is going to take long. They expected these sanctions that were going to happen, but they strengthened the relationships that they had, and that is why until this day those relationships are still benefiting them. And here's the thing, right? That I don't think we speak about enough. It's not really too technical, but it's simply the fact that the USA has lost the amount of power that it used to have. And that is why I was speaking about a retaliating empire. This empire that feels that it is losing. And it is correct. The USA is losing the amount of power it used to have. Back then, the United States, and we see it with Iran, even until this day, we see it with Cuba. When they imposed sanctions, those sanctions would destroy a country's economy and livelihood. Eventually, what would happen is that the people on the ground would start to retaliate against their current government, and the USA would be able to impose a leader on that country. So it was always a regime change strategy. But it worked. It was strong. They were very strong because the US dollar was that strong. But what happened over time is that people started losing interest in trading with the USA. And that means the value of the dollar started being unimportant, considering how important it used to be, whereby if they said you couldn't get dollars, you couldn't trade with the rest of the world. But currently, Russia is able to trade with its allies. It might not be military, but they are to an extent economic allies using their own currencies. So if that is the case, it means that the relationships that you were referring to in your questions are being strengthened over time. And in no time, I can promise this much in the coming year and etc. These sanctions that have been imposed on Russia, because they're failing so much, will just fall off. And because Europe continues to struggle to fight with the US, they cannot get on the same wavelength. It means that all that is going to happen is that the United States is going to give in, or Europe is going to give in. But both of them are declining superpowers. That is their biggest problem. And the USA decided to do something about it, which is to bully the rest of the world and put tariffs on everyone that they are able to if they don't listen to what they want them to do. So, it is quite an interesting time. But I think specifically when you're going to Russian gas and oil, Europe cannot function without Russian gas and oil. And India has positioned itself in such a perfect position because of how strategic they've become. Even though the United States is trying to make sure that they are going to force India into not being able to trade oil and gas with Russia. But that would happen because I remember after they signed an agreement recently, I think 2 days ago or so, Indian politicians came out and said, we are not going to stop our relationship with Russia. Absolutely. Just so that we can benefit the United States. It makes no sense. It is illogical because we need this oil, because this oil benefits the 1.6 plus minus population of India, 1.6 billion, that is population of India. So that is very key, Clarice. The floor is yours. Thank you, Clarice.
And absolutely, it brings us again to understand how interconnected the global world is. It's at a point like this, it is imperative that policymakers and other stakeholders look for ways to ensure that the strengthened terms of international relations that will suit the present dynamics of the world. You talked very much about the United States of America, Pasika. I would love us to dwell on it, still particularizing with the model of the deal probably trade agreements between India and the European Union. is still the rhetorics. The rhetorics of retaliation has been seen with the United States of America lately under Donald Trump, or should I call it the rhetorics of bullying and interference of sovereignty due to their drastic decisions or engagement with countries. But now this deal is already, a proof that the U.S. hegemony, or U.S. as a hegemon in the world's affair, is declining. And what analysis can we give to this, and probably parameters to strengthen new dynamics through the alliances formed, particularly with countries of the global south and global north and other, strategic nations of the world?
I think one of the most obvious ones is BRICS, and BRICS has presented itself as this economic alternative, and I think that is brilliant. The fact that we have this platform in which countries are able to strengthen themselves without having to deal with the hypocrisy of the West is something that is very fundamental, and I think that it's not going to be easy, because if we go back and look at how Trump reacted to BRICS and what he said before he even got into power. He said he's going to dismantle BRICS, but he didn't understand how strong BRICS actually is. BRICS is not just a platform in which people come and have a chat and then it is done. No, BRICS is actually a very strong platform that has been started on a very good basis. The only thing is improving BRICS and really activating the BRICS banks so that we have actual functional systems in place that do not center one country, specifically China, because it's the most economically strong, the most economically strong country of the lot, but we need to make sure that we strengthen these different organizations throughout the world, or unions throughout the world, for us to be able to have a genuine multipolar world. And if you think about that, is what Europe is fighting against, and actually specifically America, because I really struggle to see the relevance of Europe. Europe's relevance at this point in time has moved away because of what exactly is it contributing to the rest of the world, except for rhetoric. The same rhetoric it doesn't necessarily believe in, and the same rationales that it provides that it doesn't even believe in, because their hypocrisy has been exposed. So specifically, you cannot have this world that has power invested in one place, and in this one space of theory and hypothesis where all ideas and all rationales of power can come from. That rhetoric is none, a non-starter. So what do you have now? You have this multipolar world where you can be able to decide to align with who you want to align with. But unfortunately, and I do understand that the idea is that the EU cutting its relationship with Russia and going to China. I think that topic on its own, if you think about it, is also a non-starter, because Russia is going to benefit whether they like it or not, because the oil that is being consumed that they're buying from India is coming from Russia. So Vladimir Putin is still going to benefit as much as he needs to benefit. For him, if he wants to continue his operation, he will continue, because he will still be getting this unlimited amount of income that will be coming from the rest of the EU. And it's not that they don't know it, they know it themselves. So that's why I'm saying that if we think about it, the issue is not even necessarily the EU. The EU is a non-entity. Its importance has flickered away. They still are richer than the continent because they continue to benefit from the continent of Africa, but they are not a superpower anymore. The superpower is the one that continues to even bully them, who are the EU, and that is the USA. That is who we should be paying significant attention to. The value of the EU as compared to the US, one country against an entire continent, is something that is quite interesting. And I think that is something that is worth dissecting and diagnosing. And then when we now have to think about Russia benefiting from being able to still generate income and benefit from the EU, it's something that's not going to stop anytime soon, because it is unsustainable for the EU to continue or attempt to buy oil from the US. And that is something that comes in, Clarice. I know I'm going on now, but I think to conclude this, that is why we need to now start looking at why the USA thought it was a great idea for them to go into Venezuela and even Greenland, wanting to go into Greenland, because they want to make themselves a central point of supplying oil to Europe. Because the Russian oil and gas has now been limited because of these sanctions that they themselves have set on Russia. So now it means that the US is able to increase its output of oil, specifically because Venezuela, we know, has more than just oil, but specifically of oil, and being able to send it to Europe. So how do you do that, and how are you able to sustain that? For the USA is to overtake another country. So we need to start looking at that and being able to link it back to what we are currently speaking about, to the topic that is currently on the table about Russia, gas, the EU, and specifically India. So these things, they are connected in one way or another. We just need to, now have a proper rationale and discourse around it. Thank you, Clarice.
Absolutely, yeah. Quite interesting understanding the discourse that is reading beyond the discourse that is being presented to us by key EU leaders, and of course have measured the social ramification, especially economic ramifications of this decision. Is it actually taking the continent to an era of deindustrialization? These are some of the questions that we continue to answer as we analyze. You said something quite interesting. We know that for Trump, it's all about business. And if it should mean infringing the sovereignty of a country, like what we saw in Venezuela, to note that the action has already placed the country in some sort of, an economic pressure, but which that is not really, something that we need to applaud. If we are looking at a clear multipolar world, which you just highlighted, dear Pasika, it is a world where we respect the democratically elected leaders, especially in their economic and political sovereignty. And of course, how can we see a world outside the corridor or the influence of U.S. Dominance? And of course, how can these, open up the minds, so probably, the minds of the decision-making bodies of the EU to look beyond the implications, probably the rationale of just placing sanctions, but then still seeing the U.S. using it as probably a tool to attain an objective of being a major supplier of oil, which you just highlighted. And that is another rhetoric that we continue to look at it without probably we can't go without looking at what Africa can take from all of these decisions, because when we talk about 21st century, we want to look at alliances that will lead to practical growth and development to benefit especially the lower level, because people who feel the highest effect or impact of such a severe decision making that will affect a whole global economy. It's a new phase and a new dynamic across the African continent. What can we learn from India's position, and of course the resilience of the Russian Federation in actually advocating the cause that is pertinent to them, that will lead to a sustainable development of the entire nation or continent?
There's a lot that the continent can learn, but I lately, when I've been thinking and trying to rationalize about the continent, I become very frustrated because I think the continent has much more potential, but I don't think in our lifetime we will be able to see the potential of the continent of Africa. And it is sad to say, and I've made this position very clear in every platform that I've been speaking on, that Africa has all this potential. Africa can do so much, but because of its current leadership and how they have decided to align themselves, I do not even see the continent taking advantage of what is happening in the rest of the world, you know. But what I am positive about, even though I have many things to say about a country like Rwanda, I think Rwanda as an individual, not speaking as a continent, has the potential to take advantage of the global discourses and instabilities that we are currently witnessing by positioning itself strategically. But we know it won't happen because even the number of EU countries have cut their ties with Rwanda. But it was because it was trying to play the game.
Sure.
But this global political game, you can play it, but you need to play it when you know you have enough power to back it. Rwanda is a very small country, and that's why it's able to make inroads into Congo and still fight because it's able to strengthen itself strategically.
Sure.
But with that being said, I think they have the ideas and ideologies of actually trying to play global politics and play with the global big boys. That's what you can call them, global big boys. But after that, we go to our other bigger countries in the continent. I'll use an example of Egypt. Egypt could have been one of the first countries that would have stood for Palestine, but it didn't. If anything, I feel as though it aligned itself with Israel. The United States bombed Nigeria, a random village that has nothing to do with what the United States is trying to do. In it saying that Christians are being attacked in Nigeria, we know that's absolute nonsense. But they were able to bomb a random village in Nigeria. And what happened? Nothing happened. It means that you cannot rely on Nigeria or its leadership for it to be able to do anything in these very tricky times. You look at, I'm trying to think of, these economic superpowers. South Africa in its role, it's also struggling because it's finding itself as a victim. Even though we appreciate the fact that it can fight, it is fighting, especially in the case of Israel and Palestine. It is positioning itself. Israel specifically is using the United States to bully South Africa, but South Africa is standing its ground. So if that is the case, it's something. But still, I don't think that the continent, at where we find ourselves right now, we are actually going to be able to fight this war that is facing us or what is currently happening and position ourselves strategically. So that is what I have to say, Clarice, to your question about what lessons can we take. The only lesson that we can take as a continent is we need to have better leadership. Because the amount of leaders in this continent who are so corrupt, who are so nationalistic, are not going to take us anywhere. If anything, all these leaders that we read on historically, that this is what they tried to do, this is how they tried to change the lives of their people, all these leaders are going to be the only examples that we have of great African leadership. The rest of them, the priority is going to self-enrich, is going to be self-enrichment, and the rest of the population is going to continuously suffer. And I think that is very important for us to think about what alternative leadership should we start looking at. Thank you, Clarice.
Absolutely, alternative leadership that will be so rational and practical to the realities of the African continent that will actually, speak to the demands of the African people, African leadership and African governance. How can it become very strategic in the diplomatic standing, given that its voice is resonating every moment at the global arena? It's time to probably take very strategic decisions or even radical decisions that will serve the interests of the states and not actually bring the continent or some nations into a state of quagmire. As we round off with today's edition of Global Insight, we want to actually ask again if actually the Europe is weaponizing its relationship with maybe its position on Ukraine crisis against Russia, and how is it negatively or positively affecting the European bloc as a whole. And of course, we want to also look at, India's strategic position as, a middleman in the world affair, especially in line with doing business. And that notwithstanding, I want to take this opportunity to thank Arnold Dovely and Paseka Farumali, who actually made it today to bring insight on this very strategic topic that actually zooms on the European position, the European bloc's position on phasing out reliance on Russian energy and its global ramification, and the rhetorics of doing so, and also signing a historic deal with one of Russia's major partners like India. It is on this note, ladies and gentlemen, that we'll draw the curtains into today's edition of the program Global Insight, while thanking you, Paseka Farumali, for your great insight, and wishing you a wonderful weekend as you stay in the company of programs on Pan-African Media.